Hi, my name is Noah Gift, and today we're going to talk about data engineering with AWS Step Functions for the impatient. So what we're going to do is take AWS Step Functions, which are really a collection of tools that can allow you to orchestrate operations. We'll take a Lambda function, which is a function that we can use to orchestrate a unit of work. Translate some text, take that translation, put it into another system that can do some sentiment analysis, and then finally come up with some kind of scoring protocol. So really in a nutshell, it's this chain reaction that we're going to use by using this step functions mechanism to do real world data engineering. All right, let's start with this repo Noah Gift AWS-step-functions. And if we take a look at this, this is going to be a brief tutorial on how to use AWS Step Functions to perform operations. And in particular, there's a new feature of Step Functions called Design Your Workflow Visually that is a really powerful way to have, let's say, no code, low code type style coding to solve a problem. And let's take a look at the final thing we're going to build. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and add a step function that orchestrates this first phase, which is entering a phrase, and we'll accept a phrase from somebody. Next, I'll take the output of that after I do some things to it, and then I will perform sentiment analysis, translate it, and then finally I'll figure out in a third function here how to score the phrase and maybe perform some kind of action. Like for example, customer service, right? That could be a good example of this particular action here. So as we scroll down here, you can see the end result is we've got this series of actions chained, 3 different Lambda functions, and this is something that we can look at in this code as well. If you look at this step function 1 here, you can see that this thing has a payload that accepts in this event, and I say if the phrase appears in the JSON payload, let's go ahead and do natural language processing using the Boto3 comprehend API. I then pass that in. I tell it it's going to be the English language, and then I return back the results of that, and we actually add it together in a payload. So really that's phase 1. And then in phase 2, what I do is I take that payload and then I translate it. So I go through here and I translate the result of that other operation from English to Spanish, and then I return back this payload. And then in step 3, I go through here and I accept, again, a phrase. And then what I do is I say, if the phrase is positive, then we return back this really nice sentence that says, thank you for, improving the quality of what we're doing. Otherwise, we're going to return back a result that says, listen, we actually have some problems with your response, and we'd like you to clean it up a little bit or make it more positive. So again, this is a little bit of a toy example here, but the idea here is to build a kind of a customer service response system. So what I typically do is when I'm building something like this is I go to the AWS Cloud 9 environment, and I also have a window open with Lambda. So here we go. You can see this is a AWS Cloud 9 environment, and let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. If I say get status, you can see that this is a repo that I'm actively working on. And if I say get remote -v, you can see that I checked out that code. Now I made a few changes here, so let's go ahead and rectify those changes. I'm going to say get add, and then I'm going to say get commit and say, updating the latest changes. And what's nice about this is I can use this as essentially a proof of concept. Let's go ahead and write this out. We'll save this and then save it, exit. So it's essentially a proof of concept where inside of here I can even open up, let's say, IPython and play around with code, or say import Boto3, or even in some cases, for example, in this exact environment, we can see, let's say, this step 3 function. I could even import it, right? I could say, from step 3, import Lambda handler. So in a nutshell, it really is helpful to be able to interactively, kind of toy around with this, and I could pass in a payload or whatever it is I need to do. So that's typically how I start to develop these things. And once I've got something working, Then the next step is I'll go again over to Lambda. And notice it's pretty straightforward to create Lambda functions. These are existing ones I created, but let me just show you real quick how we would create this again from scratch. I'm going to go through here. I'm going to say, we'll call this demo step 1. And I'm going to go to runtime and select Python 3.9. Now, this is a critical component that is easy to get yourself in trouble with, is if you didn't select some kind of execution role via IAM that allows you to make API calls, you won't be able to do anything. So you could use a template, or in my case, because I'm doing special API calls, I'm going to use an existing role I had set up earlier called admin role. And this admin role lets me do basically anything I want with API calls. So I'm going to go ahead and do this and say demo step 1. And then if I wanted to, maybe kind of a lazy way to prototype things is I could go back to whatever code I was working on, just literally, copy it, go into here, and then paste it inside. Now, once I've done that, what's kind of neat about it is that I can actually click this deploy button, and then it's ready to go. So the only thing missing is that I'm going to have to give it a payload so I can test what it does. So in this particular example, I'm going to create a test payload, and we'll just call this phrase like this. And then I need to put a phrase that matches that. So I'll say, phrase, and we can go here and say, it is a beautiful day. And then we'll add this as a phrase. Format the JSON created, and if I test it, it should return back something useful. There we go. So it says it was able to detect the sentiment analysis, which is positive. It's a beautiful day. Great. Now I could configure a second test event if I wanted to test potentially, a negative interaction. So we could call this, toxic comment or whatever it is I'm trying to test, and then I could go through here and say, I don't like the LA Lakers or whatever it is I want to say. I don't like the Los Angeles Lakers. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and create, and I'll say test. Perfect. So you can see here now it says it's a negative sentiment. So I've really been able to very, very quickly prototype up an action. Now, just for speed here, I'm going to show you, kind of cut to the chase here, that I've already got other functions as well. And, again, this was the one I demoed, but let's look at step 2 here and notice that in step 2, this would be the second phase. So I'd assume that someone would call my step 1 function, take the results of it, which again, remember it says the phrase and the sentiment, and this is going to intercept that, right? And so if I go here, I'd already created a payload, so we can test and see what that payload looks like. You can see that it's able to translate what goes inside of here and still keep the other stuff inside of that event. So let's go ahead and look at that, right? You can see here, this again is assuming what would come out from another Lambda function. Now, we can move on to step 3 if we want to do some other fancy operation, which is right here. And then again, I could look through here. This one says, okay, I'm assuming I'm going to have a phrase, I'm going to have a sentiment, I'm going to have the translated phrase. And then this again would be if I was building, let's say, a bespoke customer relations tool, I would go through here and say, if it's positive, then, do some action. If it's negative, like again, if somebody's putting, toxic comments into your customer service tool, maybe you don't want to show that to the rest of the people in your company. You want to tell the person, look, we don't accept those kind of comments. Rejected. And so again, we can test this and we can see that this actually works, right? In this particular example, it says, hey, we don't want those kind of comments, but if I test a positive, right, it's going to say, thank you for the positive comments. Your Spanish translation is X. So I've really got all the pieces here to chain all this together. So how do I now build a step function? Well, pretty straightforward. We would go over to this console and build one of these step functions. So let's go ahead and get started. And you can see here, these are kind of the hello world. You can see there's very complex things you can do. You can pass things inside, do like different left or right choices or states. Really very complex type of operation. Now in our particular example, we're going to create a state machine and we're going to design it visually. And so I'm going to go through here. And what's really neat about this is just how cool it is to be able to pull from all these different options. So again, you can go to invoke a Lambda, you can publish to SNS, you can call containers, you can call other step functions. So you could build, essentially like a Willy Wonka's chocolate factory type operation here and really put a lot of stuff together all the way through to SageMaker to SQS, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just chain together 3 of these. So I'm going to say 1, I'm going to go 2, I'm going to go 3, and then I can get rid of this. We don't need this, and it's actually very, very straightforward here for us to change this. So we're going to say this will be called step 1, which would be input demo. And then we will go here and say, what do we want the function to be? And we can say we want this function to be step 1, right? And then we can go here and we can call this one, step 2, input demo, right? And then let's actually, yeah, there we go. And then in this particular example here, we can say step 2. There we go. And then we can call this again, right there, step 2 input. And now if I go to 3, we can go through here and we say step 3 and say input step 3, input demo. And we can call this scoring or whatever we want to call this. And then this would just be the final operation, which would be step 3. And so we can just say next, and then it's going to give us the raw JSON output if we ever wanted to, save it or do whatever we wanted to do with this in terms of version control. Now I just need to call it something, and we'll just call this demo customer service system. And there we go. All right, and we can say create new execution role. That's fine. There we go. So now that I've got this, all we need to do is execute, right? So if you remember, this particular initial Lambda function is going to accept a phrase. And so I just need to put something inside of here, just say, this is a beautiful day. There we go. And let's go ahead and start this execution, and we can watch it in action, which is pretty neat as well. We can click on this. We can look at the input. Right, here's the input. We can look at the output as it's being generated. There we go. It says the output was, this is a beautiful day. It detected it was positive. It said, este es un hermosa dia, right? We were able to say the Spanish version. And then if we go down to here, it says, thank you for the positive comments. Your Spanish translation is this. Now, what happens if we do a different execution and we say new execution, but this time, maybe say something that we don't want the customer service people to accept. So we'll say, this is the Los Angeles Lakers are a horrible team, or whatever. I'm saying something negative, and then we go through here and we see what happens. It accepts it. We again see the phrase. We see the output. It's negative. We want to potentially limit that to the scoring system. It says, hey, clean it up. We don't like that kind of comments. You need to improve your translation. So really, you can see how if you have the ability to code very quickly, Lambda functions, you can build, I would say in an hour or so, you could build a complete customer service system end to end that you could tie into your system. Now you can evoke this via command line tools. You can evoke it with other step functions. But as a data engineer, I think this is one of the most powerful technologies you can use. And if you're in a hurry, this shows you how to get started.